Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Hey y'all, it's Amber here. Just wanted to stop by before the show to show some love to all of our amazing patrons who recently joined our Patreon. We have 10 patrons as of today, and we want to shout those friends out. Christina, Charnel, Hales, Kaylee, Haley, Tia, Tempest, Eepton, Monica, and Kelsey. Thank you so much for showing your support. Those of you who still want to get in on the fun and the action, you have time to, and we will be also giving away a book. We're doing a book raffle with patrons only at the end of the month. So you have until June 30th, and we'll be drawing a raffle then. We will be giving away the book New Sons. New Sons won a World Fantasy Award, and it was also edited by Niecy Shaw, who we've had on the show. So be sure to join our Patreon. You can find us on Instagram at the Sci-Fi Sci Podcast. And also from there, you just click the link in the bio, and it'll give you access to our Patreon, our Amazon book shopping list. Find all the fun things. So be sure to join the Patreon, and let's get started with the show. Welcome to the Sci-Fi Sci, a podcast on the Believe Podcast Network about Black science fiction, fantasy, and staying on the same page in our marriage. Today for episode 37, we'll be discussing the second half of the Amazon Prime series, The Underground Railroad, directed by Barry Jenkins, and the book was written by Colson Whitehead. Just to let you know, there will be spoilers for everything in the second half of the series, so if you haven't seen it yet, please pause, because I don't want to spoil this incredible show. Before we get started today, Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I have a confession to make.
Ooh.
You know how I said I was going to hang out with some friends at an arcade bar?
Uh-huh. So you're talking about when you went out the other night. You said you were going to go to the arcade bar.
Yeah. And you know how I came back a little late that night?
Yeah, you slumped in here at 3 a.m.
I think so. Well, we didn't go to an arcade bar. We ended up going to a drag show.
You went to a drag show without me?
Yeah, it was awesome.
Benjamin.
You didn't want to come out. You were watching 101 Dalmatians.
Yeah, so that means you just get to go see drag without me.
Yeah, it does. But I
was
felt bad.
essentially watching drag. Cruella's like drag. No?
I guess so.
God. And I just want people to know, I was watching old school Cruella. Do not get it twisted. I'm not watching that new shit on Disney Plus. They're trying to ram it down my throat, and I'll have none of it. What were the names of some of the drag queens you saw? Shout them out. Were you just drunk?
No, there was in all the names. I don't know. I think one of them was named Cyanide.
Okay. Period. Anything else fun happened that night? So you hooked up with a drag queen? That's what you're telling me.
I'm trying to think. No, just oh yeah, karaoke too. I sang really bad.
What did you?
I had to close one ear and sing. It was so bad because I couldn't hear the music.
Okay, wait. You couldn't hear the music?
Yeah, like I couldn't hear the tone of the music, and I couldn't hear myself, so I had to close one ear so I could hear myself sing.
What did you sing?
Santa Fe.
From Rent?
From Rent, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's more of a disappointment to me than you going to a drag show. Like, so not only did you go to a drag show without me, you also sang Rent on karaoke without me. Could you give the people a sample?
Nope. The bouncer actually had to jump in and start singing with me because I fucked
just sing
up
a little
so
bit.
Bad.
You got to let the people. You got to give the people something.
Let's open up a restaurant in Santa Fe. Sunny Santa Fe would be nice. Let's open up a restaurant in Santa Fe and leave this to the roaches and mice.
Pack up all our junk and fly so far away. Ben, that was not bad.
That's the only part I got right.
Were you doing like a let's open up? Like, was it like a rock version?
It would. Let's move on to Apple Podcast ratings because we've gotten a bunch of new 5-star Apple Podcast ratings. Thank you so much, friends. Amber, go ahead and read those.
I just want to say before we read these Apple Podcast ratings, which we're always going to try to share a couple at the top of the show, that if you're somebody who's like, bitch, I cannot afford no Patreon right now. I got shit to pay for. My car just broke down. I just got a parking ticket. I completely understand that. And Apple Podcast ratings are one way that you can still support the Amber Ben Shit Show because they are completely free. Even if you give us a bad rating, those still legitimize us. Recently, Ben was like, we need that 1-star rating so that people know we're like the shit, right?
Yeah, they need to say something like, this is reverse racism. All they do is read black authors and celebrate black creators, and I really want that 1-star rating. Or being like, these libs, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right. Like you don't know you're doing something right until you piss somebody off. But until that moment comes, I found 3 podcast ratings this week that I absolutely love and had to read. So this first one's from Valley's Mama. Therapy. When I say therapy, it's literally therapy. I haven't actually heard the podcast, LOL, right? But I'm such a huge fan of your TikToks, and Loki, I just want to be a leaf on one of your plants because, man, it makes me so happy to see your videos. I'm going to listen now. So Valley's Mama, we hope you've listened to the show. We still appreciate you leaving us a 5-star review just on the faith of our TikTok. I think like that speaks volumes to what we're doing over here, right, Ben? I had to include that one. Isn't that fucking hilarious?
Yes.
Okay. The other two, I think they have listened to it. All right. Kay Kermy, who definitely listened to it. We follow each other on Instagram. I cannot rave enough about this podcast. These two are smart, sharp, hilarious, and straight up fun. Amber is so funny. Is it kind of weird I want to be friends? I just can't help it. You are my friend. Ben is just the right amount of nerdy. Because, it can be too much sometimes. They bring such keen eyes and insightful perspectives into their content. If you're not listening to this gem, you really should. Love, love, love them. We love you too, Kay Kermy.
I just want to say that you added some lib there. So I feel like it's appropriate to say that.
Yeah, well,
the writer didn't say it can be too much sometime.
Yeah, they did.
They did not say that in here.
They said it. I saw it. And this last one is from Jakaria520. Love, love, love. I really want to be like you guys in the next 5 years. Which is that a read? Do we act old, or does that mean like we are?
Just read the review. Right. Come on, you're disrespecting these people's words by interrupting it. Like you interrupt so much that you actually interrupt someone's written word with your own thoughts.
You're right. I hate how right you are. I'll start over. I really want to be like you guys in the next 5 years. I can feel the love, and you two brighten my day every day, especially with your TikToks. Keep doing the things you do. Much love from ATL Ho, Georgia.
Again, they did not write ATL Ho.
But
they wrote Atlanta, Georgia.
I'm an improviser.
When it comes to reviews,
say Atlanta real
you
quick.
should just Atlanta.
So you know somebody's really from Georgia or not because when they say Atlanta, they take the T out, the second T out. So if you want to pass the Georgia check, it's Atlanta, Georgia.
Well, I'm gonna say Atlanta because I'm not from Georgia.
Period. Poo. All right. Well, if you are still listening, I promise you this is the point and time where we're going to actually get to the show.
Okay. So first impressions, Amber, like this second half, what did it leave you with? What happened with your emotional well-being after watching the latter half of this incredible show?
So I'll be honest. Last week, I was very hopeful about I would have been happy with any crumbs that Barry Jenkins left us. And so last week I was like, I really trust that he's going to carry this out and it's going to be a good job. And he completely blew my mind, my expectations. It was incredible. Ben and I take notes when we watch the series, and I stopped taking notes on the events that I was actually seeing and started just writing how I felt as they happened. So my notes went from Ridgway does this, Cora does that, to I'm so anxious, I'm so somber, I feel sad, I feel scared, I feel prideful to be Black, just at different parts of the show. I'd love to hear what your first impressions of the second half of the series was.
I was very satisfied that every loose end was tied up, and the parts that didn't need to be tied up were appropriately left untied for many different reasons. Let's go ahead and jump into Chapter 6, Tennessee, and the subtitle is Proverbs.
Got it.
And sort of this episode is, we've left off where Ridgway has left Jasper, who has chosen to starve himself to death, and has brought Cora back to his home. And his home, as we discussed, his father is this very inclusive, liberal man who would hire freedmen, and he brings him back. He brings Cora back, and you can almost sense throughout this episode that Ridgway is almost shameful a little bit as he's returned home to see his dying father. And at this point, his father has left his estate into one of his childhood friends, Mac, who we didn't bring up in our last discussion, but in episode 3, Ridgway is actually the cause of Mac's disability. Ridgway, being a little bit older than Mac, sort of tricked Mac into jumping into a well and has now has sort of a disability and limps as he walks.
And to be clear, if you haven't seen the series, Mac is a little black child who we then later see becomes an adult. So it's a pretty big deal that someone is leaving their entire estate, 1, to a black person in these times, and 2, to not their child.
Yep. And also in this episode, the relationship between Cora and Ridgway starts to become more complicated because Ridgway takes Cora out to eat and sort of presents his idea of the American imperative, which is going to be a recurring theme throughout the next couple of episodes, which Ridgway sort of philosophizes and presents his idea that the American imperative is to subjugate other races and to conquer and to utilize manifest destiny to uplift the white race. And we soon discover, though, that in this town that Ridgway has returned to, there's a group of black men who end up rescuing Cora in the dead of the night and bringing her to this beautiful underground railroad station. And Cora gets to finally write her story and escape from Ridgway. And that's sort of, the ending of that episode, and it finally concludes with Mac making the decision to shoot Ridgway, the person who's caused all this harm, and kill him. But Homer comes in and saves the day and kills Mac and frees young Ridgway to then go and pursue Cora, who is presumably has been told that Ridgway has been killed, and so she thinks she's finally free. So that's episode 6, or as it's referred to, chapter 6, Tennessee Proverbs. So talk to us.
I hate when this happens. I hate when someone who ain't shit is about to be killed and they ask for, can a man get a drink before he is finally shot and killed? And then the person, for whatever, always, goes to get them a drink, and then they end up escaping or whatever. So I knew the minute this person asked, I knew the minute that Ridgway told him to go get that drink, I was like, fuck, why does a dying man who's done horrible things deserve one last whiskey? My jaw was on the floor. It's also interesting because we had to start watching these episodes apart from one another just because of our schedules. And Ben watched this episode before me. And I could see Ben one morning just brushing his teeth. He was like, episode 6 is going to rock your socks. And I was like, no, don't spoil it. And I watched it, and I just sent him pictures of like my jaw on the floor after this episode. It's so anxiety ridden. And then you get excited on some parts because this is when we first see Chidi, which is played by Royal, when Cora is brought into Tennessee with
the actor
shackles on.
Sorry,
I know.
Okay.
I'm going to say that.
Okay.
The actor from The Good Place, he played Chidi in The Good Place, but now he's that in everything. So his name is Royal, and his name is William
Jackson Harper, I think.
William Jackson Harper, amazing actor, but we first see him in this, and him and a gang of other men rescue Cora.
Like black cowboys, or
black
like black
cowboys, which I love. Nobody likes to talk about black cowboys or buffalo soldiers and anything like that. So how high was your anxiety? Like, did you look at your freaking Garnier watch during this episode? Because it was so anxiety inducing.
I don't know if I felt anxiety. The thing I did feel, though, was that this episode complicates Ridgway's character, because up until this point, we thought we were just getting Ridgway's backstory in episode 3, and then it was going to be done and over with. Mm-hmm. But we see old Ridgway again, and we also see Mac again, and also where Ridgway first went and met the first slave catcher in episode 3, he returns back to that bar again. And so many characters throughout this show are introduced and later returned to. And there is this sort of almost like a grace note, for all the characters that we thought that were done. But there's a theme. They come back, and it might be a little bit, it might be a lot, but they return, and that is so incredibly powerful. But the thing that just really, really bothered me
about this episode
as a whole was this idea of someone raising a child, but because of outside influences, the way you raise your child actually might not be how your child comes to being. And there's this haunting scene, like the final words of old Ridgway, because young Ridgway goes to his father on his deathbed and says, "Tell me you're lying. The Great Spirit was all a joke. It was just complete bullshit. It's a fucking lie." And he's like yelling at his father as his father is dying. And then his father just wakes up suddenly. And that gave me chills. And his father says, "I wish I had done more to shape the boy into the man." And Ridgway like falls back in his drunken stupor and is just haunted and is terrified. And we start to see that even though Ridgway is trying to develop his own philosophy that rivals that of his dad's idea of the Great Spirit, he cannot do it. He just fails over and over, and he is haunted by the ethics of his father, even though he keeps on trying to convince himself that as a slave catcher, he's doing the right thing.
Do you think we're all haunted by the ethics of our parents?
I think to some extent, whether for good or for bad, but this whole episode really brought that to light. And it's funny because Cora calls him out on it as she's like sitting at dinner. Remember that?
Of course.
And she's like, she basically says, you can change all the names of the things you're doing,
because he calls like black people a lot.
Yeah, you can change all the language, but at the end of the day, you're just a demon. I think she calls him, or something along the lines. So
yeah, and he sort of takes this sick pleasure. And I don't know. I think that Ridgway sees a little bit of his father in every black person. He picks like these moments where he feels like he's losing a fight or an argument to then remind Cora of trauma. So, for example, one time she would like, but he also likes to talk to Cora. It's very strange. He'll start a conversation with Cora. Cora will say something like, "Why are you talking to me? Like, you literally don't see me as human. Why are you just telling me about how Tennessee was burned down and struck by lightning? Like, why are you conversing with me?" And then he'll be like, "Well, your friend Lovey, she was killed brutally with a hook in her spine." And you're just like, what? And obviously Cora is affected by this, and he did the same exact thing when Cora was slightly not winning an argument, but just calling into question his hypocrisy. That's when he conveniently decided to talk about Caesar as well. And it's like, what is this sick mind game that you like playing, where you're clearly bored, you need me to talk to, you start talking to me, and then you remind me in these ways. Like, that's why the first time we saw the show, Ben, in the first series, when he shared that about Lovey, I was like, do you think he's telling the truth about how Lovey died? Because there's some evil cruelty in him that just wants to like fuck with Cora sometimes too. Yeah,
I think he is telling the truth. So we find out that Caesar died in this really brutal way at the end of episode 4. I guess it would be at the end.
I think it's at the end of this episode.
No, where I'm talking about like purely, we find out what happened, but when he died was, I think, the end of episode 2.
But we find out how this episode.
Yeah. So he dies at the end of episode 2, but we find out how he died in episode 6, and it's just awful. And he just describes in graphic depiction how his blue eyes were plucked out of his head.
Yeah,
and they don't show any of this. It's just pure.
Thank you so much for not.
Yeah, it's just pure, and you can see Cora's reaction, because she has to go to the bathroom at one point, and as she's using the bathroom, he like starts to give this monologue about how Caesar was killed,
how he was like thrown in jail, and And then, the sheriff or the deputy at the jail basically unlocks the jail cell for 40 to 50 white men to just completely and women to come in and just destroy this person. And that's when I was like, Ben, do you think this person is lying or?
No.
But no, it's just evil.
Yeah. All right. So chapter 7, Fanny Briggs. Oh my goodness. What a relief for this episode, where we go back to the end of episode 4, where we had Martin and Ethel, who were the abolitionists who hid Grace, the little girl, in their attic, and also hid Cora in their attic. And the way that episode ended was, as a person we didn't mention was Fiona. Fiona was this Irish house girl who hated Ethel, because Ethel is sort of cruel, like refers to like black people as the N-word. Even though she's an abolitionist, she is cruel, but she is still acting this. She is also hiding these two black women, a little girl and a black woman.
But she doesn't want to. I wouldn't call her an abolitionist. I think she's married to an abolitionist and she's having to deal with it.
Yeah, I think for the time, if you were hiding a black person in your house and you were not ratting on them and you were providing them food, like, she's still a white supremacist, but she's still an abolitionist. Like, abolitionists were still white supremacists.
I know, but she wasn't an abolitionist on her own volition. She was forcibly, like, because if she ratted out her husband, she would have been killed. So she sort of found herself like, fuck, now I am like aiding and abetting two black people. I don't think that makes you an abolitionist. So she, in that episode, going back, she does do this whole prayer warrior thing where she believes it's her God-given purpose to save black people. Do you remember that? She's like praying over her. I think she thinks it's her purpose to, air quote, save the heathens. But I don't think she would call herself or wanted to ever be in a predicament or be an abolitionist. But keep going. Yeah. Anyway, sound off on the Patreon. So Fiona has hates Ethel because Ethel sort of treated this Irish house girl like shit. And once it's discovered that Ethel and Martin were hiding black people in their house, Fiona takes a lamp and sets fire to the house. But that fire has started to spread everywhere. So Fiona gets stoned, basically. Yeah. And she her body's broken. She crawls to that sanctuary that we see. And in my mind, I was like, oh, Fiona's about to be killed. She's about to be killed. But what happens is Grace, who we thought was dead, actually sneaks out the back and does not get burned alive. And because of the distraction of the smoke, she makes it to an underground railroad station and gets away free. And she assumedly gets away free, where Fiona is killed. But also Ethel is also stoned and strung up on the Freedom Trail, they call them. And then also Grace also goes by Martin's body, who was shot and killed by Ridgway. So there's all these characters who we thought were done over, their story's finished. They get a conclusion, whether it's horrible in the case of Ethel, or hopeful in the case of Grace, who ends up telling us her real name, Fanny Briggs, who, by the way, is referred to in Colson Whitehead's 1999 novel, The Intuitionist. He refers to a slave girl who taught herself how to read. And so she gets away on the Underground Railroad. I know. And it was just 20 minutes. That's all we needed. That was just such a breath of fresh air, which is why Barry Jenkins is so masterful, right? Because, hate calling back to Little Marvin, but it's just we get these moments of ups and downs and insane sadness and torment, and then a breath of fresh air. And I think after, episode 6, and knowing that Ridgway was about to get out of this situation and keep catching slaves and find Cora, it was such a nice way to let us all breathe a little bit. I read somewhere that this actually might be a dream sequence, and it's actually... Where did you read that? Fanny does die and sort of
it's metaphorically her going to an underground railroad to go to heaven.
Wow. Who wrote that?
So Vulture,
Okay.
the reviews on Vulture, which, by the way, everyone should read those, but the New Yorker only lets you read 2 articles at a time unless you use it on your app and use the DuckDuckGo app, which is a way of hiding your cookies. So there's ways to get around it. Also, you can go into incognito mode for some of these websites. Like, that's how I keep on reading Chicago Tribune articles, is I just go into an incognito, or I use a browser that doesn't collect your cookies.
You just blew my mind with that, though. So that's what the writers at Vulture think?
Potentially. I don't think so. I hope not.
We'll share the article in the description box, but I could see it that being one way, but I don't know. I feel like if it was a dream sequence, there would have been something a little bit more. Barry Jenkins would have gave us a little bit bigger of a hint, but I don't know. I hope not. I hope she really did escape, and yeah.
There is one quote here where Fanny meets the conductor, May, and May says to Fanny, our stories will always be right here, and she motions to her heart, because the book from the North Carolina station has been lost, and that those stories have all been lost. And Fanny feels sad about that because Fanny couldn't bring that book over. And May says, don't worry, the stories we hold are going to be here in our heart.
It's like we'll always have our stories. I love that so much. This every time they got to a conductor station and they got to give their testimony, that really reminded me of when we interviewed P. Djeli Clark and how he said a lot of the ideas that he has are drawn from those slave narratives that he has since revisited and read. And I remember watching this, pausing Amazon Prime and thinking to myself, like, I just would love to find a collection of slave narratives and stories to just revisit, to hear the voices of people whose language has been taken from them and they've had to like parse together language again to then tell their story. And I don't know, there's so much value in that.
Chapter 8, Indiana Autumn. So this opens up with one of the most beautiful scenes where you see a black man who we don't know, but he checks a grape and he tastes the grape, and he's dressed, well dressed for the time, and he sort of bites into the grape, and the juice sort of like comes down his lips, and then he like nods his head in satisfaction and walks away. And so we're introduced to this small all black community in Indiana who is sustaining itself by making wine. And they bottle it all themselves. And Cora is brought here by Royal, and she is now living as a freed woman, and is starting to sort of understand what it's like to be free and to work not for somebody else, but for yourself. So, yeah, let's talk about Indiana Autumn. Indiana, Chapter 8, Indiana Autumn.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed this episode because for those of you who might not have seen it, or for those of you who have, it does a really great job showing us parts of slavery that we have not seen, because we've seen slaves get whipped, we've seen slaves get sold on auction blocks, in movies and things like that, but we don't get to see that imprint that slavery leaves on you. So I really enjoyed that Colson Whitehead in the book and then Barry Jenkins in the TV series are showing the PTSD and the always looking over your shoulder notion that is carried with a runaway slave. Not even just a freed person at the time, but like I'm a former slave, or I'm a slave that earned their way and paid their way out of slavery, and how that still has scarred me, either physically or figuratively. And so there's a scene where you sort of start to see that Royal and Cora have a thing for each other, but she won't even let herself go there because she is so unused to the freedom and liberation. And this this chapter really showed me like, wow, even when, I mean, which should be so obvious, right? But it's like, even when you're free or presumably free, you're still always enslaved, like in your mind. And I think Barry Jenkins did a great job with that. So I definitely wrote like runaways mentality versus free slave mentality. And one of my favorite quotes from this, at some point, Royal also teaches Cora how to use a gun. Like, you slowly see her starting to take back pieces of her identity and learning to protect herself and learning that she is worthy of love. But you can still see that piece of her that's already been taken away from her, which is very hard to do.
This also introduces us to two main characters, Mingo and Valentine. And both Valentine and their respective families. Valentine's wife, oh my gosh, what's her?
Gloria.
I think it's Gloria. They have a very loving relationship, but we're introduced to these two main characters, and it definitely shows the complexity of slavery at that time, right? Because as you said, there was a runaway type of freed person. That you were like, okay, how do I get freed papers, right?
And Royal was born free. So they're starting this relationship that, like we were saying last week, that already has a power imbalance.
Right. So that you're mentioning two different identities. And then Mingo's identity is that he bought himself out of slavery. And he bought his wife, then he bought his two daughters out of slavery. And so there's that freed mentality. And then there's the fourth kind of mentality is where your master, when he died, drew up your freed papers and emancipated you. So there's emancipation from the master, there's self-emancipation, there's runaway, and then there's born free. And the complex nature of all these different identities are something that I've never seen explored.
Absolutely. Because in schools, if it was even taught the 1 month of the year, it was taught, these are black people, they were slaves. Next slide.
Or it was like, these were runaway slaves and they lived happily. It's like, actually, no, Cora is haunted. She is fearful that this Indiana safe haven is temporary and it's still near white people in the town.
That's so relatable because obviously, you know, we want to do our best to connect what we're seeing to what we experience. And it's relatable because sometimes when you've just been through a lot in your life, when something good happens, you don't trust it. Like that, I find myself going through that sometimes, not even through a lot, but I just, like, the nature of being black means like, oh, if I got an email with somebody saying they like my work or they want to meet with me, I shouldn't trust this. I can't confidently be like, you know what? Yep, I've worked hard. Of course, this email is like the well done email, but it's not. There's something always where I'm just like, let me not get too excited because, or then when I'm proven that I shouldn't have got too excited about something, I'm kicking myself because I'm like, why did I feel like I was okay? Why did I feel like I was safe? I never feel that way. So how am I still getting tricked again? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, but I think also that's like something that Black Americans have inherited.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that
I'll even call my brother. He's like, why did you get excited about that? Like, not that he doesn't think I'm worthy of something, but he's like, never get too excited about something because it's always going to be some bullshit. Like, that's just the mentality that has been, you know, when we talk about that, like, generational trauma, like, that's how it goes. Like, even when I've ever gotten a raise at work, I'll, like, call my mom and she's like, congrats. But, you know, just be easy because you never know what's going to happen next week, you know?
Yeah. Well, this episode ends with, I mean, there's lots of, like, very cute scenes in here. Like, there's that one line where Royal is sort of flirting with Cora and says, like, you real pretty like that when you smile. And then later in the conversation, Cora repeats it back to him. Like
you know, you real pretty like that when you smile.
And then she repeats it back to him. It's really adorable. But the episode ends with Cora having this dream where she discovers where like all the railroad leads to in her dream. It's like this massive station, and it's a very ominous, like goosebump dreams where like time works differently, and it ends with her seeing Caesar again. And again, this is where this show is so powerful, is that even the dead have come back to interact with us in this show. And so even though Caesar has been murdered, brutally murdered, there is this moment of tenderness in which Cora dances with Caesar, and there's this element of finally saying goodbye through her dream, in which she's almost like, I felt like we were led to believe that, oh, now she can move on
and be free
and move on to her relationship with Royal.
And she's grieved, like like Barry Jenkins gave us a visual for grief. I will say one more thing about this episode that I really, really enjoyed. There was a quote. So we also discovered that there is a I guess unfinished railroad station in Indiana. So like Royal takes Cora in the backwoods and he uncovers the Indiana station and they climb down it. It's kind of unfinished or whatever, but Cora's still just shocked and she's like, I didn't know it went this far, and like, who built this and things like that. And Royal's like, you know who built this. And then he lights this torch and he says, ain't nothing in this world black folks can't do. And oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional. That just really, it was a nice thing to hear because it's so true. I don't know. I felt the same way I feel right now when he said that. And I will take that part of the series with me wherever I go. Because when something does feel very hard and inaccessible, I have to just remind myself, like, I'm the descendants of people who built, and literally this, obviously like not the one we saw on the show, but a portal, a gateway of safe houses, like, or the ingenuity and the fear that they must have felt then. And so him saying ain't nothing in the world black folks can't do, just like really was so nice. Can we take a break?
Yeah, let's take an ad break.
Okay. Hey y'all, it's Amber. Getting a little emotional here, but that's okay because guess what? I got my yoga practice always and forever. For those of you who don't know, I am a full-time yoga instructor, and I have recently partnered with a brand called Roam Loud. Roam Loud is a Black-owned business that specializes in yoga wear and apparel, athletic wear, and Roam Loud is here to give you 15% off with the promo code HOTMESS15. So if you're looking for a new brand to support, because you know we got all the Lululemon stuff, we got all the Aloe yoga stuff, please check out Roam Loud. I just got myself the Yanta Plum set and the Black Anza set, and I just got a pair of joggers as well. So check out Roam Loud at roamloud.com. Shop there and get 15% off using the promo code HOTMESS15. Okay, let's get back to the show. All right, you ready to talk about chapter 9?
You're okay, Amber?
What are you talking about?
Well, you know, you just told me that if you're ever having a hard time from now on, I could just say, remember what Royal said. There ain't nothing in the world that black folk can't do.
Yeah, you better say that.
I'm going to start saying that.
You should, it's true.
I think it is really important to remember that, because even when black folk do create awesome, incredible things, as chapter 9 shows us, Indiana winter, appropriately named white folk, America, has a way of just stomping down. As we're recording this, we're actually, today, it's the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, where Black Wall Street was destroyed by, not only through white supremacists and folks there, but also through military folk personnel, and also with the okay of the police at that time. And I think, this being an important day to remember when that happened. And this episode, Indiana Winter, we discover that Mingo, who wants to sort of develop a relationship with the white people in the town and sort of sell wine and sort of disperse the wine throughout, where Valentine says, no, like, we can't make any deals with white people. And these are the two patriarchs of this community. And they sort of have hit this sort of headway in which now Mingo, and for him to make a deal with the white people in the town, which up until this point, he's provided wine to the judge. The judge warns the town whenever there's a slave catcher who's in town. So they have this nice working relationship. But at this point, if they're going to make a deal with the white people, they can't let any runaways inside their community. And so Cora, being a runaway, is now at the center of this debate, where Mingo is telling Cora, you need to leave so that we can have a deal with this white folk. And Valentine's saying, no, we should actually take everything, leave Indiana, and head out west. And it sort of ends with this really powerful debate that they're having. Just a
long-standing debate
in
the African-American community for quite some time. Yeah,
right, exactly. Like, how much do we assimilate? How much do we isolate completely? And that's the big question of this episode.
Can I say something that's currently happening right now? So there's a lot of internet online. I talked about this last week, but it is an ongoing conversation, the bonnet conversation, because recently Monique came forward in a robe on Instagram Live. A little bit of the backstory. This black lady who lives in a black neighborhood was wearing a bonnet. She was on the phone, and this white lady who had just moved into the neighborhood had called the cops on her for talking too loudly on her phone. The cops come. They don't kill her, thank God, but they write her a $385 ticket for public indecency, for talking on the phone loudly, and for, just being out, like literally outside of her home, talking on the phone in a bonnet or whatever. And so Monique comes forward, and Monique, who is literally popular not for being like Michelle Obama, I'll say. If you're not familiar with Monique's work, she's literally like, "Hi, Professor Ogilvy," like loud on the Parkers. Comes forward and was like, us older, wiser sisters got to teach these new sisters that it is just just unprofessional, unkempt to walk around in these bonnets, walk around in slippers and PJs. And I remember thinking, like, you're the Mingo of today. Like, the person policing black people about, like, she's like, when I go to the airport, I see black women with their bonnets on and it makes me sick and we got to do better. Mind you, she's doing this whole speech wearing a robe in her bedroom, right? And we just have to...
Did she do it to be funny? I mean, no, Monique, she was serious?
Not. She was dead.
Do we have to cancel Monique now?
No, of course not. I mean, she could get up there and be like, I hate black people, you all are freaking peasants, and I'd still be like, you're still funny though, so do your thing. But I'm so sick. I just want a shirt that says like pro bonnet at this point, because there's something very it's anti-black to keep policing black people, because it's the Mingo thing, right? Like, if we just assimilate and we just do this, they'll accept us. It's like, no, so I might as well wear my bonnet at the airport. Like, they don't like me because my skin. And I know in this debate, Valentine, I was team Valentine, obviously, because he was like, our color must do. Our color will suffice. Like, they have stripped us from our lands and blended us all here. And there is no place for the African in this country. So no matter what we do, no matter how we act, they are going to hate us. So why not wear your bonnet is essentially what his closing argument was.
Well, also, to be fair, like Mingo, we get a full backstory on Mingo. And at one point when he's sort of, I guess, what's the term? Presenting his ideas to these white business owners, and he's talking to these white business owners in a game of cards or whatever. And it turns out Mingo beats them all in cards because Mingo's like a fucking genius. And at one point, his judge friend, he's had a really white judge friend from this town who he's had a really strong relationship with, the judge says, you need to be careful, like, around these white men, because they're going to start thinking that you're just as good as them. And Mingo's response to that is...
They're going to think you're just as good as them.
Yeah, and Mingo's response is, but I am. He, like, repeats it, but I am. And this episode ends in just, like... Oh. It is the most horrific ending. So essentially, which... It's hinted throughout the first two episodes that it takes place on Valentine Farm, but essentially the white businessmen hire these militia. They look like militia. I think they're military. Hire military to shoot up the church and kill everybody in the church.
On the Valentine farm. Yeah.
On the Valentine farm as they're having this debate. However, because of Indiana's laws to the right to bear arms, Mingo and Valentine are murdered in the middle of their oratory presentations. They're shot and killed, but eventually the people in the church are able to get out and fight, and there's this big ensuing battle. And in the middle of this whole ensuing battle, Ridgway, who he's finally found Cora again, takes Cora in the middle of this chaos and takes her away, and that's sort of like the end of the episode. So
the massacre, it's hard because there were two hard moments to hear. It's hard to hear Black people vehemently stand behind the idea that we have to earn our identity, and it's hard to see, like you said, like everybody was killed all the same.
Yeah.
Which was kind of Valentine's point.
We're both sides of the coin. I think at one point he says to Mingo as they're discussing, we're two sides of the same coin. They see us the same. And Mingo's like, well, no, you're lighter skinned than me to Valentine, and they're always going to see you as something different. So there's a reference to colorism, but at the same point, there's also this idea of like more education, or how did you buy yourself out of slavery, or did you run away from slavery? But at the end of the day, the white folk who come and kill everybody in that town still see a Black person as a black person
all the same, when in reality, it's funny because sometimes people come up to me and say, like, what's it like being in an interracial relationship? And this would be a friend of mine dating a Jamaican person. I'm like, you're in a different blend of races and cultures relationship, more so than I am in a lot of ways. Like, we sometimes don't see ourselves as a blend of different countries and cultures. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that made any sense or not, but you're right. Like in the eyes of the white person, we've all been put in one box in one category. But like, if you're an American dating a Black man from Trinidad and Tobago, you're in a far more culturally different relationship than I am.
But not to the white gaze.
Thank you for clearing up.
Yeah, that's what you're getting at.
My distinction. So it's like, it's interesting. Like even me looking at those two men arguing, I'm like, these are two people from two different tribes, and this is the dialogue, and which is good because we're not a monolith, but it's sad when one of those dichotomies have adopted the white gaze and the white philosophy and the idea of like, if we just tuck in our shirts, if we just cut off our locks, they will accept us. And that's just not true. And I really love Valentine's point of saying, like, he said, a useful delusion is better than a useless truth. To me, that's just like, I got a better shot of living the life I want to live in the way I want to live it than thinking if I change myself, I'll be accepted and I'll be seen as human. It was just great. I mean, the monologues in the speech are award-winning and eloquent.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add to it. I'm not smart enough to add to that conversation. But yeah.
This is the most cinematic episode, I would say, as far as like the self-contained story of it, the drama of it. And it was so heartbreaking because towards the end of this episode, before Cora is captured by Ridgway, Royal is shot and killed as they're like walking down. Autumn is coming, winter is about to start, and they're walking down as you hear gunfire in the background in this beautiful vineyard, and Royal is shot and killed, and you're like, God, like Cora has lost somebody again, and then out of nowhere Ridgway comes and like just picks her up and takes her away. And at this point, Ridgway has discovered that there is an underground railroad. Cora takes Ridgway to this underground railroad station, and as they're going down this big ladder, in one of the most beautiful scenes that we see at the prologue of the entire season, Cora knocks Ridgway's legs out from under him, and they fall, 30 feet. And Cora
lands on Ridgeway.
Korra lands on Ridgeway. Ridgeway's bones just break, and Korra falls over, gets up, goes back to all the chaos as Ridgeway is dying on the ground, and brings back Molly. And at this point, Sybil, which was a woman that Korra was staying with, she was shot and killed in the midst of the chaos, and Korra rescues her daughter, Molly, and brings her down. And at this point, Homer is down and like cradling Ridgeway. And as Korra is about to go down the railroad, Ridgeway starts yelling, like, "I'm going to find you." And he starts quoting his idea of the American imperative, which is to subjugate any race that is different, to take what is yours. And Korra basically says no more, turns around, and with the gun of Royal, shoots him. And as she's shooting him, she's getting flashes of Caesar. She's getting flashes of Royal. She's getting flashes of all the people, Lovey. And that scene it just made me think this moment in which certain groups need to step into a realm of violence for freedom. I think of the assassination of Fred Hampton, which, were from the Black Panthers, 50 years ago. And I think about, I wrote down all the black towns that were destroyed by white supremacists. So we have Wilmington, North Carolina massacre, the Colfax, Louisiana massacre, the Atlanta massacre. It just goes on and on. And this being, 1921 Tulsa, May 31st being the 100-year anniversary. At some point, it's going to be too much. And Korra had to bear arms, use her Second Amendment rights, and kill Ridgeway.
Yeah.
And that's the end of that episode.
That's the penultimate episode. And yeah, chapter 10, Mabel.
So this is where we learn about Mabel, and Mabel, who is Korra's mom, and her decision to run away. And we're given the backstory of Mabel, which is the fact that she is, I guess I would call her like a medicine woman. Like she knows.
She's a midwife.
She's a midwife. She knows all the roots, all the powers of certain spices, and all the ways of like providing healing. And at this point, she helps one of her friends who's going through like postpartum depression, who's now being told to go to a different plantation to raise 2 twins. And
also, so this woman who's going through a postpartum had a stillbirth,
yes.
A stillborn.
Yes.
So she's lost her child and now is experiencing that, and now being told now being forcibly used as a wet nurse for 2 babies that are not hers, 2 twin boys.
And Mabel's trying to tell her, like, don't get attached to these. They're going to be sold down the river soon. And the woman, Mabel's friend Polly, who has had a stillbirth, is now forced to be a wet nurse, but she is suffering. And Mabel's trying to convince, like,
her husband Moses,
her husband Moses,
and the overseer Conley, the white man,
that she is suffering and like should not be, nursing these children, and they refuse to listen to her. And what happens is that Polly kills herself and kills these 2 twin boys. And as a consequence of that, Moses is beaten and left to die. And then we see that the person who took his place was prideful, which we had seen in episodes 1. And so all these characters that we saw earlier in the season, they come back, they're referred to. And Mabel, in this just fit of like sadness, decides to run away. And as she's running away, she almost wakes up and remembers that she's left her daughter behind. She's left Korra behind. So she decides to turn around and go back, but she is bitten by a snake and she dies in the swamp. And so the whole series, we thought that Mabel had ran away, had escaped.
And this whole series, Cora has resented her mother for running away, and people have, talk shit about it. They're like, yeah, she did leave you. Like, it's this constant reminder of, like, your mom left you behind. She's probably somewhere in Canada. Who knows how far away she is now. These chapters were perfectly done back to back because we sort of see Cora step into a motherly role, deciding to raise Molly, and Cora has sort of cursed her mother's name throughout the show for escaping and never looking back, and now we see, like, she never did actually escape, or maybe she did in a different way, like in the way that Jasper did, but she didn't meet the fate that everybody thought she did. And even Ridgway had sort of had this vengeance, he had an affliction and an obsession with capturing Cora, because he was like, I was never able to capture your mother Mabel, she got away from me, so I'm gonna put all of this vitriol into you. And we see that, like, what was all that for? Nothing, because Mabel died tragically.
And so the series ends with, we discover that Cora still does not know. We know as the viewers the fate of Mabel, but no one else does, right?
Right.
And so Cora and Molly sort of end up to the end of the railroad, and it's just desolate. It's nothing. And they are sort of picked up by this man, Ollie, and they head out west. And that is the end.
Oh, and before that happens, Cora decides to plant the okra seeds.
Yeah.
So that's kind of another way of her sort of like letting her mother go, letting that grief go, planting these seeds and moving on. This show better win all the awards. It's so incredible. And then you also just get obsessed with, like, fucking Mabel's cheekbones. The entire episode 10, you're like, this is so sad. This is so traumatic. We got scared because this episode 10, if you remember, was the only episode that gave a trigger warning before. So you were like, we've seen so much. What the fuck could possibly happen in episode 10 that needs a trigger warning? But it was so masterful, brilliant. It changed my life.
The thing is, like, so much of this show, there's these interspersed moments where characters who have died are just standing. And they're standing, I think in episode 6 as well, we see a glimpse of Jasper before Cora has been, freed by Royal. And so there's these moments where characters have died, but we eventually see them again, And again, this show has this like really tender way of memorializing those who have gone. And there's a beauty to here. And I remember someone describing this last episode as almost like an epilogue. Okay. It doesn't really feel like the conclusion. I felt was very clear in chapter 9, Indiana Winter, that this is the end. But chapter 10 felt like more like an epilogue. And it was a little depressing as well, because once they get to the end of the railroad, it was almost as if the railroad never really truly led to freedom.
Yeah.
Like the railroad.
It was a place to just use to escape. But
yeah. But escape from what? You went from one, yes, like down deep, deep south, awful, awful. But even when you head up north and you finally thought you had made it, she thought she had made it when she was in Indiana. You thought this was safe, but that whole scene where they destroy the town, I mean, that wasn't slavery. Like, we weren't seeing slavery. We were seeing
freed people
being persecuted. And even in chapter 10, like, they reach to the end of the railroad and there's nothing, right? Yeah. She plants her okra seeds, and then she needs to travel again out west.
All right, last little thing. Let's just get into a sigh.
I wish that we knew a little bit more of like the logistics of the Underground Railroad. I guess also in the book, apparently they don't really go into a whole lot of it, like how, like who, what was the actual construction of the Underground Railroad? How did it look like? When did it happen?
I got you.
Who organized it? There's that dream sequence where we see a center station, but that was a dream sequence. But it also seems bizarre that this vivid dream isn't actually a reflection of what actually is. Like, I would have liked to know a little bit more about the history of this alternate Underground Railroad. I mean, that's it for me, though.
I hear that. Sometimes, I know we talked about this last episode, but sometimes I enjoyed the modern song at the end of the episode, and then sometimes I didn't. It's like, oh, that was so somber and so poetic, and now I'm hearing like bombs over Baghdad. Sometimes it just didn't connect for me. The This Is America outro connected for me. That was a good one. And I know that every song was chosen intentionally, like if you listen to each one, but every now and then I would be like, I kind of just wanted a fade out on this one. But I mean, I'm splitting hairs. And with that being said, Ben, why don't you warp up the show?
I'm gonna say what I said last time. So in conclusion, watch the Underground Railroad. Really don't binge it. Sit with it and journal about it for real.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Sci-Fi Side. We're staying with the Underground Railroad for a third week, but this week we are reading the book. So maybe you've been reading along or maybe not, but please, please, please pick up your copy of The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, or you can listen to it on Audible, and we will see y'all next week for episode 38. Bye, y'all.